Hello and welcome back to Podcast from the Edge with me, Peter Bruce. I'm afraid we're going to have to talk about the South African economy again, and while it may not be quite the stuff of winning rugby test matches with only 14 men on the field, it's still the really important stuff. How are we really doing? And Bernstein has led the Centre for Development and Enterprise, the CDE, in Johannesburg for more than 20 years now, producing deep analytical reports and speaking and writing almost constantly, it can sometimes seem. She's reasoned and clear, pragmatic and patient. And Anne, thanks for joining me for this podcast. You recently produced yet another thoughtful report titled South Africa's Unemployment Catastrophe, a Call for Urgent Action. And we're going to talk about that. But at the same time, there's been a sort of sudden chorus of voices on the economy, haven't there? The ANC's got a new 10-point plan to turn the economy around. The DA's has a detailed proposal that is going to get it, it's going to get an actual debate in Parliament on it, which is remarkable. And business, in the form of Adrian Enthoven, one of the leaders of Business Leadership South Africa, has just given a speech asking whether South Africa may not be turning the economic corner, and then proceeding to answer that question in the affirmative. There was also a pretty decent medium-term budget policy statement from the finance minister last week. There's been a debt upgrade by S&P. The Rand and the JSE are doing extremely well. And we're no longer on the grey list. So, Anne, what's not to like? We're going to be okay. What's all this about a catastrophe? Why don't we just relax, surely?
Well, it has been interesting, Peter. Firstly, I'm delighted to be here with you. It has been a sort of flurry of things, and then a sort of an attempt to change the narrative in the last few weeks. So lots to talk about. The first is, let's talk about Adrian Enthoven and the speech that he made.
Yeah.
I'm the first to welcome good news, and I think he's right. We need to recognize what changes have been made, and they are potentially very significant. I don't think we've turned the corner. I think we're approaching the corner. And if you look at a lot of the reforms, energy is the most important, which he would argue. Yes, private sector can generate as much energy as they want, and that's great. But there's so much more to do. And he, in fact, says that. He says, maybe we've done the easy part and it's the hard part now, and we shouldn't kind of give up, we shouldn't let our guard down. So I think there's a lot still to be done. A big issue is the price of energy. And then, of course, it's how does all of this hold up if we were to get growth going again? So I think there's progress, and there's also progress on logistics. On the other hand, I want a much more ambitious approach. So take, for example, freight rail. Operation Vulindlela's latest report says that by 2030, they hope to get 200 tons per annum transported on rail from the big dip we've had.
That's 200 million tons, I think, right?
200 million tons, sorry, yeah. 200 million tons. Yeah. But that only takes us back to 2017, where we were doing that sort of number. So you have to put this all in perspective. And then I would say, yes, recognize what's happening, and that is positive, but also look at the whole chessboard. And the whole chessboard is that unemployment, as you and I speak today, is worse than it was a year ago by some 200,000 people. And we are simultaneously watching the kind of the absolute chaos, corruption, and disaster of our criminal justice system. So yeah. I'm a kind of look at the whole chessboard and then take an assessment, but there is no doubt that Operation Vulindlela has been able to make some progress. Without doubt.
Just to explain to listeners who might not know what Operation Vulindlela is, it is a an agency inside of the presidency created by President Ramaphosa to bypass, in a way, much of the otherwise slow-moving policy making that other departments might make. And Vulindlela in many of the indigenous languages implies an opening up. Vula means open in Istosa, and so it's been a fairly positive thing. They have done things, and as you say, electricity was the first one. In fact, and electricity in a way was the easiest one, because all you had to say was the private sector, do what you want or what you can. And that doesn't apply to many other parts of the economy that needs reform. It certainly doesn't apply to logistics. But just to
they
come
also
back
had
to
do something else. Sorry to interrupt you. On energy, you're right. I think you're right. But they also brought in Mteto Nyati as the chairman, and what people say is an excellent CEO. But what they don't talk about so loudly is that they had to exempt Eskom from the localization rules.
Yeah.
So Eskom has been able to turn the power plants around by going back to the original equipment manufacturers and not having to comply with BEE and localization and whatever. So, but I agree with you. In some respects, the easy part, it didn't seem easy, but that was quite a while ago. And then there've been some other things, but we're still, well, if you live in Johannesburg, we still have load reduction on a regular basis, but that's probably city power. So, but it's progress. We're not worried about load shedding now.
No. Let me just come back to your report, right? So just to start the sort of, I've got a range of reports in front of me here, which I haven't committed to the screen, so I'm going to every now and again read from them. You're basically saying, and this is your report on unemployment and how to potentially resolve it. First of all, I'm sure you've written this report more than once, or a version of this.
It's our 22nd report on unemployment.
Yes. But, you concentrate to some extent on the informal economy, and a little bit like the Democratic Alliance, you're trying to find ways to make it easier for people to hire other people and create jobs. And you do that by cutting red tape. You get rid of labor market rules that might slow job creation, fixing training and skills, that people actually have skills that the employers actually need, fixing the regulatory framework that militates against smaller firms. So these things have all been fairly obvious for more than a decade. Why the need to repeat them, do you think? And are you saying anything different?
Well, I think, let me start with the reforms to the labor market. We have 4 proposals. Peter, if I can just step back 1 minute. We're saying, which you're also been writing about, we have to get growth. If you want to deal with employment or unemployment, you've got to get much faster growth. But we're adding much more explicitly, you have to get more labor absorbing growth. And this report is focusing on what we mean by the labor absorptive capacity of the economy. And we have 4 buckets of reform that we're calling for. What's new about it? There are some new things, and I'll try and spell those out in a moment. So the first and most important is the labor market reforms. Now, we're not calling for a wholesale change here. We've got very precise, pinpointed changes that we're calling for in law. The old one of, if you're not party to a negotiation, why should you be compelled to comply with the wages or conditions or basic standards that are at the very highest level of the economy? And that's really important for small firms, for new black firms, for rural firms and others. So that's very important.
What happens in South Africa is that big business talks to big unions. They set a pay deal for steel or agriculture, whatever it might be, and then everyone else is expected to follow suit, and which they don't, obviously, because they can't. But
Well,
it
they
creates
close.
it.
Some of them close. They
Yeah,
can't.
yeah, or it
In
creates a real
textiles,
tension.
for example, the unions heard of an area of the country in Natal that was doing quite
Yeah,
well, and
yeah,
they sent the inspectors and so on. So that's
yeah,
one that's an old sort of,
yeah,
we've been trying to get progress in
yeah,
that for a long time.
yeah,
On red tape, we have, this sounds so boring to everybody, and every
yeah,
year everyone's going to fix it, and it sounds dull. But I recently interviewed and learned a lot from the Minister of Transformation and Regulation in Argentina, who I happen to know is an associate of someone you and I both know, Professor Ricardo Hausmann.
yeah,
And he was fascinating on both how he's doing it and why it's so important, and speed. So just very briefly, why it's so important is to open up the economy to new, against the vested interests. So you're letting new people to play come into the economy. Very important for our country. Secondly, the way he did it was he used technology, and it was a real bottom-up approach. He said to the country, you've got a complaint about a regulation that holds you back. Tell us what it is, but don't just tell me. Write what the sort of clause should look like so that I can actually get it to happen. And then he used technology to feed all this in, and ChatGPT came back and said, okay, you can do the following sort of overnight. You can have to go back to Parliament on these few, or whatever, and which department and so on. So he's really made enormous progress. And for me, he made this much more interesting. So and more political, if you like, in the sense of opening up the economy to people who've been excluded. So we now have a proposal from CDE on how to do the boring old red tape and why it's so important. The third thing I would say is that nobody talks about this battle of quite a while ago, which is, we're calling it opening access to labor markets. The government sort of prevented labor brokers from operating effectively, temporary employment services. And this has been a very useful way in which people who are outside the networks of the big city, or their brother has a job, and in a context where so many people grow up without anyone in their family working, in fact, labor brokers give them access to the modern economy and the jobs that there might be available. So we're saying, let them come back. That's a way of opening up the market again. Someone who was head of the National Youth Development Agency was once at a meeting with us, and he was listening to this issue, and then he interrupted, and he said, I'm from Potchefstroom, and labor brokers were one of the very few ways in which I and my friends could get access to the Johannesburg sort of employment market.
yeah,
The last thing we're saying, which again we've been trying for a long time, is that a key reform in a country that's stuck like we are is to follow the example of China. Let's take an area of the country. We're proposing Kucha, which is already an economic zone. Your and my tax money have paid for infrastructure there. It's totally underutilized. It has an underutilized port. And we're saying, let's experiment on how we could attract low-skill manufacturing and see what we can achieve here. So those are our recommendations. We've put them together in a different way. There is some new stuff, but we are batting at the same door, trying to get heard. And why we're doing it again, Peter, is that, well, the unemployment situation is getting worse, not better. There's some 12.5 million people who would like to work who cannot find a job.
yeah. No, I mean, you make a very powerful point in your paper when you say that between 2008 and 2025, in effect, 1,000 people join the unemployment queue every day. And that is a very frightening number. I did hear or read President Ramaphosa in his Monday newsletter, and I'm not sure where the numbers came from. I haven't seen them elsewhere, saying that the unemployment figure for the third quarter has dropped. Would that be news if it were to come out? I'm not sure.
It has come out. It was the quarterly labor force statistics.
Oh, right. Okay.
We've just been looking at it. So yes, it did drop from the last quarter to this.
Yeah.
But that it doesn't. Who knows what it means at this point?
Yeah.
But we do know that we're in a worse situation than we were a year ago.
Yeah.
Maybe things are changing.
Yeah. So given, and of course we're in a worse situation than we were, and the ANC also realizes it. So it has a National Executive Committee meeting a month ago or so, and it comes out of this National Executive Committee with a 10-point plan that looks a hell of a lot like its other 10-point plans, but at least on paper. But it's not entirely without merit. But as usual, they promise way too much. They've always got 20 things they have to do. They want to say the steel, chrome, and manganese industries with subsidized cheap electricity, which we don't know that Eskom can even supply. If we were to reindustrialize this economy at the rate the ANC says it wants to do, would Eskom be able to manage it? Anyway, they want to accelerate the recovery of freight and logistics, improve the capacity of the state to manage big projects, drive local economic development. It seems to be too much, and I wonder whether when the ANC does these things, whether they then actually sit down and appoint people to make sure X or Y happens, or whether it just goes away. This is October the 6th. This came out. Sorry, Anne, give me a moment. So sure. October the 6th, they come out. In 1994, when South Africa became a democracy, there were more than 50 chrome smelters in the country operating. We are the biggest producer of chrome ore in the world. And our chrome smelters were adding value, beneficiating the chrome ore, and we were exporting it to China, America, Europe, wherever. There are now only 2 left. And those two, the owner of the project, I think it's Glencore, is about to issue Section 189, which we know as redundancy notices, to the remaining workers in the last 2 chrome smelters in South Africa. And a month ago, the ANC said they were going to do something about it. More than a month ago now, a month and 2 weeks ago, and nothing has happened. And I wonder, whether do we simply laugh off these plans of the ANC because we know they don't know how to make things happen? Or is there some extent somewhere where we can take it seriously and have some sort of expectation of them?
It's a good question, Peter. I'm a bit confused between the ANC statements and government statements. Before we had a GNU, I'm sort of, who knows now. But let's come back to something you mentioned before. We were the first people to publicly say a long time ago now that Operation Vulindlela was a good thing. And I think it has proved to be a good thing. It's a kind of delivery, a fix-it unit, let's call it. I'm not sure if you had a better cabinet, if you would still need this kind of unit, but I'm certainly in favor of the sort of delivery unit that Tony Blair had. And this says it's modeled on, but our situation is very different. So when you say who's in charge of doing what, I follow a lot of what Operation Vulindlela says they're going to do. Now, this is not, totally wholehearted support. I think this is a good initiative, and it's a doing unit, and their job is exactly as you said, to twist people's arms and to try and focus government and get some priority things done. That's good. What I didn't like about the ANC's 10-point plan, which sort of seemed to come out of nowhere, was well, firstly, I'm not sure we have the energy, as you said, to deal with ferrochrome, but also I'm not sure this is what our tax money should be subsidizing. So that's a question. I would like to see a case for that. I don't know. And then to come back to unemployment, one of the arguments we're making, which has caused some ire in the presidency, is we're saying the focus of the country, the focus of the GNU must be on, getting growth at all costs and getting more labor absorbing growth. And public employment programs are something we need. We have to help people in this the situation that we're in. But the president shouldn't keep focusing on this and his presidential employment stimulus as though this is an answer to unemployment. It's sort of a stopgap, but it's not an answer. It can't get to the scale we need. It's using your and my limited money to kind of pay for make-work jobs in many cases. These jobs, it must be stated, when he talks about jobs, these are not 9 to 5 jobs. No, they're short-term, they're part-time, they kind of work, it is an opportunity to get something, who knows what.
Yeah. But I have direct experience of it. So I live in a small village around which a very nice road has recently been built, which employed a lot of people on these temporary programs on the road. Now that the road's finished, they're all out of work again.
Yeah.
And very unhappily so too. And there's no follow-up, there's no, okay, well, what skill did you learn during this process? We need you over here. Can you move to Mpumalanga or Cape Town or wherever it might be? I mean, one of the big promises of this, and it's a constant promise, and Vulindlela and Rudy Dix, the guy running Vulindlela, who you spoke to on your podcast the other day, has taken this up. They're going to fix local government. How on earth do you do that in this country? Local government is more than broken. There are towns in this country that are literally drowning in shit. It's in the streets. They stink from a mile away. There's rubbish everywhere. We now have a thing called the district development model. I'm sure you studied it closely, Anne, which assumes that, small groups of small municipalities aren't able to look after themselves, so we'll just create a big municipality out of all of them. Somewhere in there's bound to be a plumber or perhaps somebody who can, fix a fuse. And this is what this was a model put together by, of course, as I know, Dlamini Zuma in Cyril Ramaphosa's first administration. There was a report, I read a very interesting report done by one of the state agencies last year, which did a survey on the district development model in local municipalities, and nobody knew what it was or what it stood for or what it could do. And I just, once again, I mean, the ANC at whatever level, be it Vulindlela, the president, or the party itself, is simply talking without really doing. And let's talk a little bit about Vulindlela, because you put a lot of faith in Rudy Dixon. You've spoken to him a lot. Apart from electricity, which is simply a box-ticking exercise to tell business to get on with it and build as much energy as they could, what else has really changed? The ports, you'll tell me that the ports are now performing better, and they are, but the World Bank still ranks them last, which means that even though the World Bank is saying that their ports are better, everyone else is better too. So we're still the worst ports in the world, even though we're doing a bit better than we were last year. What's really working in this policy firmament that you have a better fix on than I do?
No, I think you've asked a very important question. So one of my questions to follow yours would be, in a sense, we have this murky sort of situation at the moment where there's business, there's government, there's Operation Vulindlela, there are departments, and success has many fathers, and failure has none often. So one of the questions I'm not clear on is, who's accountable for what? Who should get fired if something doesn't happen? So that's one question. I think there's a tendency to say, take a good example of this are the visa reforms, which I think Minister Schreiber has really pushed. Now, they were being talked about before, but I think that the Minister of Home Affairs has actually made them happen. Now, exactly where the attributes go and what did Willem do and what did he do, it's very hard for me to tell. So I think this is part of the murkiness of a unit which isn't really a delivery unit. It's a sort of fix the things we broke unit, which is weird.
Yeah.
And it brings me back to a bigger question, which maybe you have a different view or you've thought about for a long time. One of the things I've been saying is that we need a common diagnosis of why we're in crisis on so many fronts, why we're in such terrible trouble. What is the diagnosis? Now, some people said, well, it's technical. We need more engineers to fix Eskom. Well, it wasn't quite like that. We needed to get rid of certain regulations or policy things. But if you look overall, what is the real problem that's caused South Africa? It's not to be in this trouble. It's not just state capture. It's more than that. Now, I have my own diagnosis, but I've never heard the president stand up and say to the country, this is why we're in trouble, and this is what I'm doing about it. So let me give you a good example. Everybody's very proud, and it seems like a good piece of legislation. They've passed an act that will professionalize the civil service. Good. I'm in favor of that.
Yeah.
But the big question is, what do we do with all the people now who cadres or not the right people in very senior positions that hold the country back? Isn't that one of the key causes of our trouble? But nobody wants to talk about that issue, for example. Yeah. So I think we're a country sort of blundering around where we're saying, well, it doesn't really matter if we have a pretty ineffective cabinet, most of the members of it, or who not necessarily committed to everything, we'll somehow push things through. Now, what's the end game? I don't know. Peter, maybe you can tell me. What exactly is the game plan on energy that will get us to a competitive market, and by when?
Yeah, so I think the problem you're trying to fix here is an incompetent state insisting that it occupy the center ground in the high ground in the economy, not as a regulator or a referee, but as an actual actor. So it wants to generate electricity, it wants to run trains, but it wants other people to do it with them now. This is all, this is all new. The post office, which is on its knees, now we're suddenly looking for a private partner. When they were offered a private partner 10 years ago, when Mark Barnes was running the post office, he had a real plan. And, I was astonished to learn that it was the Treasury that buggered that plan up by saying, well, you can have the post office, but you can't have the post office bank. We want that because we want, I don't know, a state-owned bank or something like that. Hasn't happened yet, and it probably never will. But it is the action of a government which employs poorly prepared people, insisting on occupying the center ground in the economy. And until it gets out of the way and becomes a really professional, and it can be a hard-assed referee as well, that's not the point. But it's got to get out of the way of people who understand what they're doing and how to do it. And if the rule is if you buy the post office, if you buy Eskom, this is the minimum you've got to do. Everybody's got to have electricity. Everybody needs to have hand-delivered mail, or whatever the case may be. And if you can make that work for you as a private company, then you should be allowed to get on with it and do it, because it's the involvement of the state that seems to me to make these things fail. What has this country, what has this government, what has the state ever done that's worked in the economy? I can't think of anything.
Well, I happen to agree with you in the main about that's the cause of our problems, but we're probably in a minority on this. And all
But
I'm
it's
saying,
so.
sort of, we're often in the minority. And I have a good example for you, which is my latest bugbear to illustrate exactly what you're saying. So for a long time, everybody said we're all in favor of small business development, but we don't have a dynamic small business sector, obviously because we're not growing, but maybe the contribution that small businesses could make to a growing economy has been minimized.
Yeah.
And then you say to yourself, whoever came up with the idea that the state should be the place or the people who look to help small business. So we send some researchers in, and it turns out that we spend at least about 6 billion rand a year by the state,
Helping small business
agencies helping small business. We found that out, but we couldn't find out anything about impact. Yeah. So I want to turn this around, and what we're trying to say is, why don't we give this difficult job to the experts in our country who are not perfect, but they're the private sector?
Yeah.
And we do this in some competitive way. Imagine if we could take 4 billion or whatever and we make them bid for it, different agencies in the private sector. And then you say, you have to report back in a year, exactly what you were saying. Tell us what you achieved. Let's have some competition here. And then we could see, but to think that officials can do this is really not a very good idea at all.
It's not possible. The metric should be not how many jobs we've created, but how many companies, how many employers we've created, And this is why I have very mixed feelings about the DA plan. But it does get a few things really right. It focuses on enterprise and entrepreneurship. It focuses on micro businesses, one-person businesses if needs be. It attempts to describe how it would incentivize them and secure finance for them and support them through the difficult business of running a business, whether it's just you or 2,000 yous. It's very hard. You've got to get up in the morning, you've got to pitch up, and you've got to take risks, and you've got to be able to withstand the sort of, the highs and lows of outrageous fortune. And what the DA plan is good at is small business and trying to find a way to encourage people. And I think that there's a whole lot, and I think the DA is missing its own point here. There is an enterprise story now to tell South Africans, because if we, at the moment, they're being chased off the streets when they try and sell bananas or onions or whatever it might be. Why not let them stay there, and sell the bloody bananas so that they can put bread on the table wherever they, the next morning. We are so frozen in, I don't know where it is, 1970, 68, whatever it might be. We're so out of it. There's an enterprise story here. And in fact, if I was the DA, I'd rename myself. I wouldn't, the DA doesn't have much equity, the name equity in it any longer. And lots of successful parties in the world change their names lots of times. But it's, there's an enterprise economy to build here. And I think amongst black voters, there's an enterprise message that will appeal to a fair number who understand now that the state can't provide for them. The state is incompetent completely. Half the ANC plan is making the state competent again. And they've been saying that for 20 years. And it's never going to happen because it's impossible, politically impossible. So the DA plan, did you read it? I mean, I don't know, it's quite long.
No, read it as a term of the BE proposal. Yeah.
So they get two things wrong in my mind.
Oh, yeah.
I think simply not mentioning black people at all is insane in this country. How can you just wipe all that off and expect the people affected to think, well, that's a good idea. Let's just ignore my cultural history. And I don't understand, it's not necessarily. The other thing that I don't like about this thing, the current DA economic policy, is the sustainable development goals, right? So the DA says that the United Nations sustainable development goals, of which there are 17, are now going to replace BEE as a proxy, as a proxy for reward, right? So if you as a company meet these goals in whatever order or to whatever extent, then you will have assumed to have been doing a good thing and you'll get a tax break. Or no, you won't get a tax break. You'll be allowed to carry on in your business and get a license for this and a license for that. That's also crazy. First of all, you don't need 17. You need to give them a South African branding, call them redress goals. Maybe there's another word for redress that's less, irritating to the DA, but you cannot wipe out 200 years of racial history here because it makes you feel uncomfortable. I read this, and I read the ANC report, and I read your report, and I read AD Entov, and I kept thinking, God, it would be nice to get all these people into a room and just force them to come out with a plan. But if one of the people in the room is basically saying, "Oh no, that didn't happen," and it was poor people who were discriminated against for 200 years, not black people, then there's no conversation. Sorry, I've been talking too much.
Well, Peter, I happen to agree with you on both counts. I was invited to talk as an independent person to the DA policy workshop immediately after they joined the GNU. And I was asked a question about this, and I said, if you can go out in the street and tell me 10 people who've ever heard what the SDGs are, I'll give you, I'll buy you lunch. But I think this is crazy. So I agree with you 100%. I think it's it just doesn't make sense to me at all. And it's very complicated. And the 17 all have sub-clauses, and it's nonsense. So that's the one thing. I think the second thing is, in a country, I agree, we have to acknowledge that apartheid and colonialism before that not only prevented Black South Africans from accumulating wealth, from accessing the city, from getting good education, a million things we all know, but it actively destroyed wealth in the few places where it had been created. So you can't start by saying, and the DA gets himself into a knot, in my view, because they say, we're not going to talk about race, but we're going to talk about poverty, and most people who are poor are black. So they irritate everybody, most people, and then come around to that. So I think
it's like talking about the Holocaust, I mean, but let's not talk about the Jews. Obviously, most people who were killed were Jewish, but, I mean, it wouldn't go down well.
I don't think it works well. It doesn't resonate with the very voters they're trying to talk to in new ways. And in fact, this is an area that CDE has now adopted. We're saying we want to move beyond the slogans on transformation or BEE, and we're going to try and apply our minds to what would be an approach that recognizes our history and talks about race, but that helps accelerate growth rather than is an obstacle. And that resonates with Black South Africans who say, no, that seems fair. So there's a fairness issue.
How hard can that be, And I mean, how does it all end? It's kind of so everybody's got a plan, right? And everyone's an expert. Everybody knows what to do. You put in an enormous amount of work. Others, like myself, don't put a lot of work in, but we read as much as we can, and some things seem outrageous, some things seem reasonable. I watched you talk last week to Rudy Dix, who runs Operation Vulindlela, and I have to say I was a little alarmed because he is clearly a man of integrity and very thoughtful. This is not a sprinter, he's going to do things in the old I call it ANC way, or maybe it's the progressive way, but bring everybody along, the unions, the state-owned companies, the private sector, the politicians, and it's he's got herding sheep or herding cats in a way. As far I was talking to somebody, a real expert the other day, about Transnet, about the railway. So the story we're being told by Transnet is that by next year, private trains will be operating on the network. Apparently, that's not possible because there's no capacity for those trains to operate on the Transnet network as it stands now. You've got to fix the network first, and also by 2030, this expert who's advising Vulindlela and Transnet, the private sector, even if things work out really well, will not be able to bring more than 20 million tons a year to that 200 million target. So they're going to get very few trips on these lines, and they're going to have to be very careful with their money because, once you've raised whatever it is that you're raising to put your train sets on these lines, you've got to start paying your bank back, your creditors, and opportunities are not going to be that easy. He did say that the system could be fixed. He reckons fixed easily with around $2 billion, right? Not rand, but dollars. $2 billion would sort out the problems that are making the system stick. Where a trip from Joburg to Durban, which is pretty much a straight line, although it goes downhill and uphill, a one-way trip should take about 20 hours. It can take 100 hours. You just don't know when you set off, when you're going to get there. And it's still the case now. And that can be fixed, he says, with this kind of money. You get a soft loan from the World Bank or IMF or whoever, and do that work, and then perhaps the trains can come on. But what I worried about, watching you and Rudy Dix talking, was it was all about the shape of things to come, but not the detail. There was no. So this train will start with open this line on Tuesday, that one on Thursday the 31st. It's all done. After all this time and all this talking, it's still not sorted.
Look, I'm not an expert on logistics at all, but I want to make 2 points. The one is what any businessman would tell me, and what any sort of book or expert on reform would tell me, is that if you want to reform, the very first step is to get the right people in charge of the institution you want to reform. Now, right from the beginning, certainly with Transnet and the whole sort of family of enterprises there, that has not been on the table in the business-government partnership. So I want to just flag the issue of who's in charge here and how are they held accountable, to what timelines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one point I want to make. The second point is, obviously rail is a complicated area, but in general, what we've argued in a report last year, looking at the SOEs, was that what we've got to do is get more competition here. It's not that one's, an ideologue on what the state should do and what the market should do. We've got to look at this state at this time and say competition, because you've got to bring prices down and you have to get efficient delivery. Yeah. So that would be the second point. The third would be a topic I would love to talk to you. You've written about it. I've written about it. But I feel that what's happened in the business-government partnership is we have meetings behind closed doors. So you and I don't know exactly what is happening. So we have sort of secret meetings. Business doesn't say all that much in public about things that are worrying them. And a voice has been, what limited voice there was, has been silenced. And I am concerned that business ambitions for South Africa are too too low. They're not pushing hard enough. Now they'll say, look how hard we've had to push. But in my view, it's more we're going to help the president do whatever, rather than here's what we can do. This is the timetable we can do it. And these are the steps, exactly what you're talking about. And it's all very mushy now. What's happening is we've had very senior CEOs having to stop what they're doing in order to help the government run the country. This is not a normal situation, and we've got to get out of this situation as quickly as possible. Now, how do you do it? There has been policy change. I would disagree with you, or maybe the way you put it. I think what Rudy with Operation Vulindlela is doing is not shouting it, but they are moving towards a much bigger role for private actors. Now, exactly what form that takes will be really important, as you would tell me, because we want competition. We want the benefits of private involvement, not just the tick box. We want to get better services and more and better prices, globally competitive prices. So I think they are moving ideologically, and that's been part of the push. But then the question becomes, is this good enough for South Africa in a turbulent world where our peer countries are doing so much better than us? To tell us by 2030 we'll be back to sort of where we were in 2017 doesn't fill me with joy. And that's why I'm saying I think we're approaching a corner, but we haven't turned it.
Yeah,
by any means.
I think you're right. I think you're right. I mean, we'll have to end it now, but I think you're right about competition at all levels. And local government, particularly local. You can't fix all towns, but you can make them compete with each other for investment. And if somebody is running a nice, doing a good job in Butterworth or Dutchwe in Transkei, versus a small town in KwaZulu, then they're going to get the jobs, and they're going to get the jobs because they've done X, Y, and Z. And the government would want to make everything the same and same regulations, and it should be possible for a mayor, once they become the mayor, to say we're going to do X and Y, and we're going to give all this land to this company or whatever it might be, and they're going to come and make bottle tops here, whatever. It doesn't matter what they make, bricks or whatever. And municipalities should compete with each other. That's how, in fact, cities should compete with each other.
Absolutely.
And the ANC, I know, the ANC is frightened of competition because it may then lose control of events. It would certainly lose control of tenders and the sort of the money pots along the way. And, financing left-wing parties is a problem around the world, and they all cheat in order to keep going. They have to. I mean, it's just a fact. And listen, it's great to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining me. We'll do it again. I don't know about you, but things drive me crazy all the time in South Africa. I love this country. I'm not leaving. I'm confident about this country in many ways, but the pace at which, Cyril, the great reformer, is bringing change about is just unbearable. I can't contain myself when there's so many obvious things, and we're watching it happen, as you said earlier on our TV sets. How do you fix crime? Well, you take the criminals out of the criminal justice system and appoint proper people. And, if you appointed proper people to do all of these jobs, like they have perhaps at Eskom now, although even in Eskom, you'll find Eskom putting the brakes on a little bit, and it doesn't want to disappear under a flood of private energy supplies. So it's going to stand its ground while perhaps through gritted teeth, sharing its system and all that sort of thing. So these state-owned companies aren't going to go away. But there's no doubt that the right people in the right jobs matter, and especially in the thing that matters to all of us most, which is corruption and crime. And Cyril, I'm afraid, Ramaphosa has sat on and over and knows about the kind of people who are running his police force. He's the son of a policeman. He knows what a good policeman looks like, and he's done nothing about it. and it makes me as mad as a snake.
Now, just to finish, Peter, I agree with you.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
known since early 2018 there was
Yeah.
trouble in the intelligence service,
Yeah.
and he knew about the police.
Yeah.
And for the head of the NPA, just think about it for a moment. Last week,
Yeah.
for her to tell the country is being swamped by crime, and we're just watching it go by.
Yes.
And you say, well, what's your job again?
Yeah.
Why,
Excuse me.
If you've got all these people who are, old Gupta or crooked, why don't you shout and scream about it? But don't keep quiet about it.
Yeah.
So I don't think this is a footnote that, we'll get to that issue. This is central to the country. You can't fix local government. You can't fix many institutions without fixing the criminal justice system. And the appointment process for the new NPA is very worrying indeed. So,
and what is interesting, sorry, my very, very last point, is that the people running these inquiries and some of the witnesses and some of the people asking the questions of witnesses are terrific. They've been absolutely fabulous, I think. And so there's a lot of encouragement to come from the way that these inquiries are being handled. And I'm very proud when I watch those people to be citizen of the same country.
It's a country with enormous potential. Yeah. It's just, I often say when I'm overseas, we're a great country and we got this strength, that strength, and the next strength. We've got wonderful people. Just the politicians I'm not so sure about.
Yeah, there we go. And we'll end it there. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening. I'll be back next week, and I hope you'll be too. Until then, keep safe and bye-bye.